But what a great topic to talk about, and what a treat to be able to talk to Dr. Collins about it. The subject from bench to bedside, how precision medicine is changing the future. I'm sure everyone, if you've come to this, you know what it is, the relatively new concept of factoring in individual variability in genes, in the environment and lifestyle in order to custom tailor treatment. And there is literally no one in a better position to talk about it. The individual who is charged with the responsibility of implementing the President's Precision Medicine Initiative, which came out in January of this year, then the head of the National Institutes of Health, Dr. Francis Collins. So I want to just plunge right in, Dr. Collins, and first of all, tell us, I mean, I said everybody here knows what it is, but let's back up. What really is it? Where did it come from?
Well, let's be clear that we have been practicing some form of precision medicine for a while. It's not a completely new concept. If you go to the eye doctor and get your eyes checked out and you need a new pair of glasses, you kind of want those to be precisely prepared for you. You don't want some generic pair of spectacles. You can get those at the drugstore, but that's probably not what you want. Similarly, if you need a blood transfusion, you were probably pretty interested in knowing that they'd done the right thing about that typing and crossing so that the blood you're getting is going to work for you and you won't have a transfusion reaction. So in a certain way, we have been trying to individualize our approach to medicine for a long time. But unfortunately, in many situations, we just haven't had the information we need to do it. So to be honest, I'm a physician. I would say most of the time, a doctor who has to take care of a patient who has a particular problem or is trying to give advice about how to maintain wellness is kind of giving the average recommendation for the average person in that situation. The individual is not necessarily being considered. Even though we'd like to do that, in many instances, we just don't have the information to do so. So precision medicine is trying to turn the page and say, let's really focus on the differences between us that matter. And some people think, well, it's all about your DNA, and that's in there for sure. We'll talk about how having your complete genome sequenced might be something you'd want to do and to have in your medical record. But that's not the whole thing. It's nature, it's nurture, it's your own health behavior decisions. It's your environmental exposures, it's your diet, it's your exercise. All of those things sort of feeding together into this outcome, which might be health or it might be illness. The goal here is really quite bold, to try to see, could we actually, in this moment in history where a lot of technology has come along that wasn't there before, to actually do this on a large scale, find out what works, and transform as much of medicine as we can into this more precision-minded approach, so that when you go to the doctor, you're not getting that one-size-fits-all recommendation. You're getting something that takes much more account of you and how you may be different than the last person who walked into that doctor's office.
So the technology is really what's triggered this.
It's huge. I will say some of us have been dreaming about this for a while. I even wrote a paper in 2004, 11 years ago, in a journal called Nature, sort of saying it's time to have a precision medicine strategy for the United States, and we need to enroll a lot of people, hundreds of thousands of people, in a research study where you could begin to collect this information, see how it works. It landed with a total thud. I mean, people looked at it and said, are you really dreaming here? There's no way you could do that at the present time. In 2004, you couldn't afford it. The cost of doing DNA analysis was many orders of magnitude more than it is now. And we didn't have electronic health records for most people then either. As much as we all sort of look at electronic health records and know that they have serious issues, they're not perfect, they're not interoperable, we have issues that we need to work on, they have arrived for many people. And most hospitals now have them, and many doctors do as well. And there's a wealth of research opportunities in that space because it's a way of collecting information on people who are willing to have you look. This has got to be appropriately dealing with privacy. So you put together genomics, you put together electronic health records, and genomics, by the way, your DNA sequence can be done now for a couple $1,000s instead of millions or hundreds of millions. You put together various environmental sensors that are getting much better at detecting what's in your immediate environment as far as the air, the water, the food. we put together a lot of the wearable sensors that monitor your health behaviors. I'm wearing a couple of them.
Speaking
In
of which,
fact,
yeah.
I have.
Tell them what you're wearing.
Okay, I can't advertise for anything here. So I have one that monitors basically exercise, the number of steps. It monitors sleep. The other is a watch that actually is pretty good at measuring pulse. I did a little bike ride this afternoon. I wanted to make sure I was pushing so I can be pushing along and see exactly what is my pulse. I was going about 145. That seemed pretty good going up that hill. And it records it. It sends it back to my computer. I can therefore look over the course of time how I'm doing. At my house, I have a scale. When I stand on it, it sends the weight to my computer laptop, so I can't pretend it wasn't what it was. And it's always tempting to do that, believe me. So all of those things give us the opportunity, I think, for a positive feedback loop for people to maintain their health that we haven't had before, but we're not quite sure which gadgets work, which gadgets don't work. We have a chance now to find that out. Put this all together. And it's not now just about let's find sick people and try to see if we can make them better. It's also let's find healthy people and figure out how to keep them healthy, which we haven't done enough of.
Right, and let's talk about how you've organized, because you're not just saying, okay, we're going to do precision medicine. This has been organized into two separate tracks here that NIH is pursuing.
Yeah, let me tell you about that. And again, this got unveiled in the State of the Union message when the president spoke exactly 2 sentences about precision medicine, but you could tell something was going on there. And you could see the people in the chamber sort of looking at each other like, well, what is that? Should we stand up? Should we not stand up? They all stood up. It sounded good. And then 10 days later, it was sort of clearer what this was with a much more detailed explanation of what we're trying to do. And you're right, it is 2 connected but distinct efforts. First part, which is focused on a much more immediate need and an opportunity, is focused specifically on cancer. Cancer is the place where precision medicine right now is in the most exciting and forward-looking space. And if any of you heard some of the cancer presentations today, you know what I'm talking about. Because cancer is, after all, a disease that happens after environmental exposures or heredity or who knows, but it comes about because of mistakes in DNA. So that cancer cells have an instruction book that's got glitches in it that's causing those cells to grow when they shouldn't. That's what cancer is. Cells that should have stopped growing keep growing, and they spread to other places. We've known about that for a long time, sort of as a description, but only recently have we had the ability to look inside the cancer cell, read the entire instruction book of a malignant cell, and find out what's driving it. And it turns out there is a manageable, although long, list of ways that good cells go bad in terms of genes that would normally stop cell growth that get lost along the way. You can think of those sort of like the brakes in your car that just aren't there anymore. Or some genes that are supposed to promote cell growth, but they're supposed to stop, and they don't stop. Those are like the stuck accelerator. So we have those now pretty good ideas, but until very recently, if you developed cancer and you needed a treatment, the treatments you were getting, the chemotherapy, largely has been developed decades ago without being able to take advantage of this new information about these pathways that are involved. New therapies now coming along very rapidly, dozens and dozens of them, are in fact targeted to that approach. So, to get to what this precision medicine cancer part is all about, the idea is to try to greatly expand the ability to find individuals whose cancers could be understood on the basis of analyzing their DNA, and those might be adults, they might be kids, and then give them the opportunity to have this sort of targeted therapy in a research basis so we know exactly what works, even come to the situation where maybe it's not one drug, it's a combination of drugs, and monitor very carefully to see what happens so that we learn why it works when it works and why it doesn't work when it doesn't work. That's a bold precision medicine approach to cancer, which we are ready to do now. And I think given the president's personal concern about cancer, given his own family, and all of our concerns about this disease, this is such a great fit for the opportunity. We've right up to the moment ready to go there, and we should just do it.
But a couple of questions about that. I think I asked you this earlier. Why cancer? I mean, why not Alzheimer's? Why not diabetes? Why did you choose cancer stuff?
Cancer really is out there a little ahead of the other disorders that we want to apply precision medicine to. But maybe it's because we know more about the cancer cell and we know that what's driving it is this glitch in the instruction book. With Alzheimer's disease, which we are working on with incredible intensity right now, we don't know as much. It's not as clear how you would mount a major precision medicine approach to Alzheimer's. I'd like to get there. When we talk about the other part of this project, it may help us get there. But cancer is ready to go. It's ready to go now.
At the same time, we're told cancer is not one disease, it's many, many diseases.
Exactly.
So how does that factor into what you're trying?
Well, it totally fits because we've been treating cancers like one disease, although we usually sort of think of it as, well, it arose in a particular part of your body. Oh, you have prostate cancer, or you have breast cancer, or you have pancreatic cancer. It's turning out that where the cancer arose, in which organ, is a whole lot less important than when you stare closely at the DNA that those cancer cells have, what's driving them. And so it may be that somebody who has a lung cancer has more in common with somebody with a bladder cancer than two people with lung cancer. We are going to have to sort of blow away our so-called taxonomy of how we basically describe cancer, which has largely been anatomic, and replace that with a molecular understanding that has much more significance for therapeutics. And that's what people are really wanting to know. What's going to make me better?
So what's the timetable? Are you already enlisting people to be part of this, or where are you?
So we were charged by the president to have this ready to start in the fall of this year. So we have been frantically, since January, convening all of the experts to shape the design of this program, both for cancer and for this other large-scale national cohort study that I'll describe in a minute.
Yeah.
So, but the goal is to get this going in the next few months.
So you're already reaching out to find people who will participate? Is that right?
So the cancer part of this would proceed by making cancer clinical trials available even more broadly than ever before across the country and in something like 2,400 different sites so that the physicians who are working in those particular cancer centers would have the ability to enroll somebody who's interested in this kind of a research program. Now, it is research. We don't know a lot of these answers. That's why we're doing this. But it does seem like the moment has come to find that out. And I got to say, you can now, if you walk through a cancer clinic or talk to physicians who take care of patients with cancer and ask them, tell me a story of something that really surprised you. All of them will come up with stories of people who had far advanced malignancy where it was pretty much looking like this is not going to work. And yet one of these new targeted therapies got tried, and a patient who was basically resigned to having the end come quickly gets better and goes back to work. I mean, we even are referring to this as a Lazarus situation, which is probably a little too dramatic. That is what keeps us particularly excited and inspired. We're on the right path here. The problem is many of those remarkable experiences don't end up being durable. There's a remission, a complete absence of disease, but maybe a year or two later it comes back. We have to figure out how to keep that from happening. The other thing I must say in cancer, and again, I'm sure this was talked about today, that has just come out of many decades of work, but it was sputtering along, and now all of a sudden it has burst forth with such power, is harnessing the immune system. Because our immune systems are probably fighting off cancers every day. Cells that got a little out of line, the immune system goes, oh no, you don't, and that's it, and you never know that that was happening. Why is it then that cancers ever manage to take over? What blocked the immune system? And what we're learning is cancer cells are diabolically clever. They actually have the ability to shut down the immune response and protect themselves against this. But now we have understood what those molecules are that are involved in that shutdown, and we have figured out how to get around that with monoclonal antibodies that have just come out in the last couple of years. And for leukemias and lymphomas, this has been an amazing turnaround for lots of these situations where we really had run out of options, and increasingly now for other cancers as well. So if one were to get involved in this kind of cancer precision medicine effort, your cancer would get details determined about it, and then a assessment of what's driving that cancer would be made, and then a choice based on that personal precision information about you, what of the menu of cancer therapeutics would make the most sense for you, and that's what then you would be tried on. And if it didn't work, they'd already know a lot about you, and they'd flip to the next option and not just say, oh, well, I guess we're done here.
Well, let's talk about, we can come back to some of that, but let's talk about the other track, which,
Okay.
as you said earlier, involves looking not just at sick people, but how people stay healthy.
Yes. And this is about every disease. We really want to understand diabetes and Alzheimer's. We want to understand autism. We want to know what it is that makes people have heart attacks. And we know a fair amount about all those things, but we don't know nearly enough. And if we really want to understand what are the factors that play out in health and disease, you need very large numbers of individuals, and you need a lot of information about all of them, because we're complicated. And the idea that you can sort this out by studying a few people doesn't seem to give you the answers that you need. So here's the dream, that we would enroll 1 million or more participants, volunteers, in this project, that they would be across all ages and genders. They would be across socioeconomic groups and ethnicity. They would be geographically distributed. This would not be a perfect snapshot of the country, but it was going to have lots of different groups represented.
Larger than your typical trial. I mean, your typical
massively larger.
group.
Yeah, nobody has ever contemplated a trial of this sort where you're actually going to be collecting this much data, and this is a big data issue for sure. You would ask those individuals to make their electronic health records available for qualified researchers to be able to see what medical experiences they have had, what drugs they have been taking, what medical claims have been made. We would ask them also to consider enrolling in parts of this that would involve the wearable sensors, like the ones we were talking about, to see what kind of data can be collected and how they would use that. And we would ultimately expect that they would volunteer to have their complete DNA genome sequenced, all 6 billion letters of their code, and done at a very high quality. Right now, we can't quite afford that for the $200 million that is in the president's budget and that the Congress has just embraced.
Just in the last few days.
Just in the last few days. Yeah. But over the course of 4 or 5 years, that cost keeps coming down. We think we could get to that point. Now, you might say, why would people want to do this? Well, I would say a couple of reasons. One is they will get information back. If you were involved, you'd be getting things fed back about yourself that probably wouldn't be apparent to you if you were just in the standard of medical care. But I think also a lot of people are just interested in taking part in this kind of a historic national moment where we're really going to figure out what is involved in health and disease. I think that from what I've heard from lots of people, they will say, sign me up. Now, how do you sign up? Now, there is an issue here about cost. Yes, there's always an issue about cost. And the way we think we could put together a lot of this, which will save a fair amount of the cost, is by asking those institutions that have already established these kinds of large-scale studies, we call them cohorts, to say, would you like to participate? And we'll just glue these together and make a much larger whole than the sum of the parts. So for instance, the Mayo folks are out there. Mayo Clinic has such a cohort. They're very interested in this. Marshfield Clinic, Geisinger Clinic, Kaiser Permanente, Intermountain, we're here in Colorado. Anybody who lives here probably has care through Intermountain. Also has a cohort of this sort. The Veterans Administration has a veterans program with 400 vets that are already signed up, and half of them have already had DNA analysis done. But it could be so much better.
But you're looking for healthy people to study,
yes.
Is that right?
Well, both.
I mean,
we're looking for healthy people, for people who already have a chronic illness. It's a cross-section of our nation. And we're looking for people who are healthy now, but maybe are at risk for illness, to try to see, well, what are the predictors of whether that actually happens, and are there ways that we could prevent that?
What does it tell you at the end of this? I mean,
what do you get out of this anyway?
What do you referred to the cost several times, and I want to ask you about that, but what do you come away understanding at the end of this? I mean, we're talking years, years of trials.
And some will come sooner and some will take a while. Let me give you some examples. So one area that we will probably learn about I think probably in the first few years, is areas of medicine where we really don't diagnose conditions on the basis of the information that we might be able to feed into it. Take mental health. If you look at the diagnosis called schizophrenia, it is a very symptom-based. There's not really a gold standard to kind of figure out, well, is this person in that category or not? We are increasingly learning that there are factors, both environmental and genetic, 108 genetic factors recently identified for schizophrenia, that are beginning to make some molecular sense out of the pathways that are involved. And it looks as if, for instance, that not everybody who's got the diagnosis of schizophrenia has the same brain condition. We may be able to separate this out. Schizophrenia is a very common disease. Depression is a very common disease. All the mental illnesses that are common in the population, we're going to have lots and lots of individuals in a million-strong cohort to begin to say, okay, with all the data in front of you, maybe we ought to completely reorganize our diagnostic criteria. And I think we could probably imagine that will happen. That would be one thing. It's more of a, you could say, a start point down the path to doing something better about prevention and treatment. But if we can't even figure out the diagnostic criteria, it's pretty hard to go on to those next steps.
So if somebody said, so what's your dream, Francis Collins, coming out of this? It would be better diagnostics?
That would be one, but let me mention some others that are maybe even more immediately sort of clinical benefit. If you look at 1 million people and you look at their complete DNA, you're going to find some very surprising things, because we are all 99.9% the same, but 0.1% is still a lot of DNA. We know, for instance, that all of us are walking around with 60 to 100 new mutations in our genomes that our parents didn't have, because mistakes get made in passing DNA from parent to child. And sometimes those are in vulnerable places, and that is, in fact, a contributor to birth defects we're just beginning to understand. But sometimes those new mutations can actually be good for you. So we're interested in finding people whose DNA says you really should be sick, but you're not. Right now, we have no way of finding those people. They wouldn't get their DNA analyzed. They're doing fine, but there's a good chance that there are people in 1 million where you'd learn something of that sort. Let me give you an example, which has led to probably one of the biggest races for a new drug on the market in a while, and this one is for cholesterol. There is a gene called PCSK9, which is, we don't name genes in a very friendly way, do we? We should have called it something you could pronounce. Well, PCSK9 came to light because there are people whose cholesterol is prodigiously low, I mean really low. And you start to wonder, well, what's that about? And it turns out they have a loss of function of this gene. It turns out there are even rare people, you have 2 copies of this gene because you get one from mom, one from dad. There are rare people where both copies aren't working, so it's completely missing. Those people have cholesterols that are like 12, and what's more, they seem to be almost entirely protected against cardiovascular disease. They don't get heart attacks, they don't get strokes. You might wonder what else happens to them that's bad. As far as we can tell, they're fine. The rare people we've encountered, one of them's a physical therapist. They're very active. They seem totally normal. So think about that, what I just told you. And now you're a drug company, and you want to make the next drug that is going to lower cholesterol in people where statins don't seem to be working. Nature has just given you a gift here. Because PCSK9, or whatever it does, seems to be something that if you could block it, you would drop cholesterol, and you shouldn't make people sick, because there are people walking around with no PCSK9 and they are fine. It's perfect sort of kind of model for deciding to make an investment in that as a drug. And in fact, 3 companies are racing each other right now to get over the finish line. The FDA is in fact reviewing those this year. And this will be, I think, for the management of cholesterol, the biggest advance since statins, all because of a genetic discovery. Now, there's lots more of those out there, but we haven't had this large cohort of people to go looking to find them.
So that could make a difference soon.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, that could be in the near term.
We need to get, of course, all those genome sequences, and of course, it's a long path from having the idea, oh, that's a good drug target, to having the FDA approve it. But it gets you on a path that you're much more confident is going to work, as opposed to most drug development programs which don't.
How quickly, say you start learning things from these trials,
Yeah.
how does that get translated into a physician's office somewhere? How long does that take?
One of the things that I think would happen fairly quickly relates to getting the right drug at the right dose for the right person at the right time. We call this pharmacogenomics, which is way too many syllables, but let me explain. If somebody walks into the office and has a particular condition that normally requires a drug therapy to make you better, let's say you have a cardiac condition or you need a blood thinner. The usual thing the doctor does is make the best guess of what would be the right drug for you. But again, this is one size fits all. We now know for more than 100 drugs that there are genetic variations that are predictive of whether that drug is going to be too much for you or too little, or maybe the wrong drug altogether. But we don't use that information. We don't use it because right now it's just not practical. The doc wants to write the prescription. There's no time to do a DNA test, which right now means sending a blood sample off to some other lab and waiting 2 weeks, so we're just not using this. But if we had, in this million-strong cohort, the DNA sequence has already been done up front. It's sitting in the medical record, and now the doc can go, oh, well, maybe you need to have half the usual dose because I just clicked my mouse and you have that variant that says the regular dose is too much for you. We could really test out this idea. And considering the number of people every year who suffer adverse drug reactions, we could make a substantial dent in that with information we already have. So that could happen pretty quick.
How does it get out to physicians, to individual patients?
So one of the things that I think is going to help with this million-strong effort is that many of the individuals who participate will be in healthcare delivery systems, like the